everybody, and welcome to the Feminine Principle Podcast, Astrology for Authentic Living. My name is Mel with Energetic Principles.
And I'm Shawna with Neo Feminine Astrology.
And in this episode, we will be discussing the astrology for the week of October 16th, 2017, and what we have titled A New Cycle of Opportunity. The purpose of this podcast is to give inspiration and guidance for this week with real-life examples of what to expect.
The three major aspects that we'll talk about today are the Sun sextiling Saturn and opposite Uranus, which we're calling I Slay All Day. We'll also talk about Mercury moving into Scorpio and conjunct Jupiter, which is all about expanding your perspective. And then lastly, we'll talk about this really sweet new moon in Libra, which is about new social cycles. So as always, please remember that some of these aspects will influence you more than others based on what's actually happening in your life right now and your personal astrological makeup. So notice what resonates with you most and always use your intuition and your logic to decide what's best for you.
Yes, because you know you best. So yeah, Shawna, let's kick off this week's episode with a quick rundown of the moon's path through the zodiac and some other minor aspects for all you astro geeks out there. Well, our lunar lady is going to wrap up her waning cycle as she starts the week off in earthy Virgo. And then she's going to move into the relationship-oriented Libra on Tuesday. She makes her way to the new moon conjunction in the late degrees of Libra on Thursday, early Friday, depending on where you are in the world, before moving into the deep waters of Scorpio. So we're going to talk much more in depth on that new moon later in the episode. So now she's in her waxing cycle as she moves through Scorpio, and she'll be there for much of the weekend before moving into the enthusiastic Sagittarius on Sunday. Also of note, we have Mercury, who's moving into Scorpio on Tuesday, October 17th at 12:59 a.m. Pacific Time, which is 7:59 a.m. Universal Time and 5:59 p.m. Aussie Eastern Time. And we'll be talking about that as well in this episode. We have Mars, who's moving into Libra on Sunday, October 22nd at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Time, which is 6:30 p.m. Universal Time, and Monday, October 23rd at 4:30 a.m. Aussie Eastern Time. And the sun also is going to move into Scorpio late on Sunday. But we're going to talk more about that on next week's episode. So just know we got a lot of changes going on, right, Shawna? Things are moving on in, to the deep land of Scorpio. So yeah. So Shawna, share with us, the quotes in the book that we have featured this week.
Yeah, so this week's episode features quotes and inspiration from the author Lucy H. Pierce. And so she's written many, many books on feminine empowerment and especially embracing the life-giving power of the menstruation cycle. So her work is totally inspiring. I came across her just by coincidence, and I thought that it would be really nice to focus on not just women's empowerment, but also the power that comes through the beauty of the menstruation cycle, especially because we have a new moon in Libra this week. So we're excited to share that with you. Yeah. And then, so all of that being said, we are excited to jump into these transits. One last note before we do, I want to give a shout out to our new patron that just joined us this week, Jeannie. I think I'm saying that right. So if you want to be really, Jeannie, thanks, Jeannie.
Jeannie, yay, Jeannie, welcome, Jeannie.
Yeah. So if you want to be cool like Jeannie, you can get the show notes that we provide every single week to our patrons. So those have specific dates, the tarot cards that Mel pulls, and then the quotes. So if you want to check that out, you can find more about that on our Instagram or Facebook under Feminine Principle Podcast, or you can go to feminineprinciplepodcast.podbean.com.
Yes, because those show notes have some very valuable things, like you're saying, Shawna. We also have reflection questions on there, as well as Shawna's action item. So there's just so many levels of of the show notes so that you can get out of them each week. So if you're interested in that, please become a patron. So yeah, Shawna, let's kick off this week's episode with our first our first dual pair of aspects here. We have the sun sextiling Saturn and opposite Uranus, and what we are titling I Slay All Day. Isn't that right? Mm-hmm. So let's just talk about who's hitting what first here. And we got the sun in Libra sextiling Saturn and Sagittarius first on Monday, October 16th at 4:13 a.m. Pacific time, which is 11:13 a.m. Universal time and 9:13 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that sextile is going to happen at 23 degrees Libra in Sagittarius. We also have the sun, who's going to oppose Uranus on Thursday, October 19th at 10:34 a.m. Pacific time, which is 5:34 p.m. Universal time, and Friday, October 20th at 3:34 a.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that's going to happen at 26 degrees Libra and Aries. So Shawna, kick us in with your first quote.
So this quote is from Lucy Pierce's book called Moontime. She says, "At her first bleeding, a woman meets her power. During her bleeding years, she practices it. At menopause, she becomes it." And so this she draws on, it's actually a traditional Native American saying. And so I thought that this was really perfect for the sun meeting with Saturn and then also Uranus at the same time, because it speaks to this evolution that happens within a woman and then within anyone that has feminine energy in general. So like all of us, we have a certain element of feminine energy and cycles that we go through. And it's like, we're kind of like meeting that initially when we're in our younger years. And then we go through these different cycles and we get to know more about the world. We get to know more about ourselves. We're practicing. And Saturn is really about practicing. It's about learning through doing and learning through trial and error. And then at some point, within our lives, within many cycles and then later in life as well, we actually become that power. And I think that becoming speaks to the Uranus element, where it's like something magical happens and things just click. So I thought this was really beautiful for expressing that combination.
And I love the trajectory of the quote, because, it's so interesting, Shawna. This might be just a side point and I don't want to get too off topic, but I find it interesting that, in our society and culture in general, a lot of times they look upon women who are older and have gone through the menopausal process as not as powerful. It's like they have lost their power in some way, which is totally not the case, as we see from this quote. It's just embracing that power, and just because you've lost that ability to quote unquote create, it's such a false notion. And so this has nothing to do with the transit kind of, but I just wanted to put that out there about like just how, how society views the woman, and especially, kind of denying her power later in her years, where we see that she's actually most potent. So yes, so that definitely, ties into this whole, Saturn sextile on, like you were saying, Shawna, about, really focusing on, doing the work and a steady accomplishment, in some sense, because as we have a steady accomplishment throughout our lives as we tackle, one kind of challenge or, mountain after another. And, as we go through those little gradual progresses, we eventually become, this master. And essentially that is what Saturn, represents to some degree, is, mastering things. So I really feel, cause Saturn's coming along first, right? We got Saturn early on in the week. So we start off this week, where we're like, okay, I gotta get down to business here. I gotta rebalance basically what I got going on by attending to some things. It's the last, It's the last sextile before, the sun's going to meet its conjunction, once we get into Sagittarius with, the sun. And so I feel like we're putting a lot of things in place right now, and getting all our ducks aligned, in a sense, to be in a better position, materially, especially with that moon in Virgo. Yeah. Cause we got the moon in Virgo that day, who's going to be trine Pluto in Capricorn. And also opposed Neptune in, Pisces. So we have a lot of on our minds, and we're definitely, we're definitely in place to make some progress in the material world and especially establish ourselves, in our working relationships. So Shawna, how do you see the moon playing in, this Virgo moon as we're having Saturn going on, and just basically wrapping up, this Sun-Saturn cycle. What do you think of those two things?
Yeah. Well, and I think firstly, I would argue to agree with you about, this idea that our culture devalues, wisdom and age and that kind of thing. And I think that even kind of we see that in a subtle way, influence our view of Saturn, because I noticed that, a lot of times the things that we read about Saturn are very negative and they're very foreboding. And I think that plays to the fact that we don't really value that wise woman, that age and that wisdom. We think of it as kind of being hardened or used up, and it doesn't have to be the case. It can actually be a very valuable and sacred kind of thing, this age and this doing things, having made so much progress, and then there's still a lot of richness there. And I think that we see that reflected even in, you're saying, where we're towards the end of this cycle. We're towards the end of, this whole past year of the sun interacting with Saturn, of our new awareness around what it is that we're working on. And I think,
it's the sun is in the menopause with Saturn right now.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's that menopause moment. And I think, so the fact that it's the menopause moment, so to speak, and it's a sextile aspect, which is about, drawing on opportunities. I think that there's a lot of wisdom that could be gleaned here. There's a lot of especially when we put in that last little bit of effort to get things done, I think that there can really be, a lot of some new opportunities or some new awarenesses, or just a sense of satisfaction even. And I think even more so because the moon is in Virgo, because when the moon is in Virgo, we're craving this sense of systemizing things and doing, making sure that like you said, Mel, all of our ducks are lined up, all of our T's are crossed and all of that. And, so I think that the more that we do to do the practical things and do these Virgo, moon and Saturn kind of things where we're okay, I'm going to fucking slay this today, I'm going to do that. I think it's going to feel really good.
Yeah, it is. Cause when we take action on the material plane, we actually have something to reflect upon physically when it's all said and done. And there's definitely, especially if you have earth energy out there, you see the value in that. It's when you clean your room, when your room's been dirty forever, that closet needs some serious attention. When you get in there and it's, you put everything away and you get rid of things you don't need anymore, and you get everything in order. It's just that sense of accomplishment through the material plane. And that's just a loose example of how, something that you can do at this time. But when you have those results in the physical realm, it's soothing to me. But maybe that's just all my earth energy there. So, we are definitely got our eyes on, where it is we're going and where, and also where our reputation lies, and how we look to figures of authority, with the sun and Saturn involved. We might have that on our mind, whether we're our own authority, and our own boss, or maybe we want to make a good impression to someone. So say you have some work, related, things on your plate, and you want to look good in front of, the people that count. This is kind of the day, to do so, or even just the day leading up to it too, because, we have to apply and separate from these aspects. So you're going to feel this type of energy probably, in the previous weekend before listening to this podcast and through about midweek. So, and Shawna, let's talk about, the cycle real quick, just so we can, 'cause we like our cycles. So let's just share a couple, time frames or dates having to do with, the sun and Saturn in its own, dance that it does. And so we had our last conjunction of Saturn and the sun, back in, December 10th of last year at 18 degrees Sagittarius. So that could be a time to look back to, or, if you know your chart well, if you have anything that is sensitive in that zone, you can kind of see how your story has developed over the last, 10 months or so. So, yeah. And then we have the square. We have the square to Saturn in March 17th at 27 degrees Pisces and Sagittarius. Then we had the opposition June 15th at 24 degrees Gemini and Sagittarius. And then we had our last quarter square, not too long ago on September 13th at 21 degrees Virgo. And so if any of those dates or times kind of stick out to you, they might be really tying in to this Saturn sun cycle, and you might gain some privy knowledge into, or even wisdom around what it is, that this cycle has represented over the past year. So Shawna, what do you think about that? Or do you resonate with any of those days or anything such as that?
Yeah. So what I notice is anyone that's having, a Saturn transit in general, those are going to jump out. I've noticed that for a few people that I've talked to recently. And I think that at this point in the cycle, it is like we're saying, it's this time of, it's kind of interesting too, because it's the end of the Sun Saturn cycle. And then we also even have the lunar cycle. We're like almost in the dark of the moon. So the moon phase is even winding down. And so, this to me feels like we're reflecting on all that we've learned since December last year, since December 2016. And especially the opposition June might be an interesting time to look at. And so it's like, okay, what did we learn? What did we accomplish? What do we wish that we would have accomplished,
Accomplished, yeah.
and maybe some stuff too, like I find this with Saturn sometimes, that I think that you mentioned too, Mel, is like, how have we stepped into our authority since December last year?
Yes.
Like how has that looked?
Mm-hmm.
And what worked and what didn't work with that?
Yes. And, since this is a sextile and it's an opportunity to work with it, like keep in mind, this is not like, oh yeah, it's sextiling, so this is going to go this way or that way. This is just energy that you have to kind of choose to work with for the opportunity. So this might be a wonderful opportunity to do what Shawna was just saying, go back and kind of see how you've been using your authority and what's worked, what hasn't. Because essentially when you're wrapping up this cycle and we're in the last 60 degrees before we get to the conjunction, we really are putting the last pieces of the puzzle in place for this particular cycle. And we are going to begin to, plant new seeds here shortly, especially, as the sun moves into Scorpio. So this would be a great time to kind of reassess how you've used, that energy and where you would like to change it so that you can plant your Sun Saturn seed, to have, a fresh new cycle, especially once it gets into, that conjunction in Sagittarius.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we plant those, wrap up this action, where we need to, and get serious around things that we've been working on and put those last pieces into place, and then start, building those seeds of where we'd like to go, in the future, especially around our reputation and our authority and just what we do, on an everyday basis. So, so that's just one piece of the puzzle, right, Shawna? We got another little piece kind of coming into play here, which is definitely different energy. And that is the sun who's going to oppose Uranus, on Thursday. And, they're a couple days apart, but like I was saying earlier, when you have something that is applying, an aspect that is applying to make, that contact, we feel it, several days ahead of time. So you're already going to be feeling this, sun opposition to Uranus, which means you might feel a little bit restless, chances are certain things might come out of the woodwork that surprise you, or you have ideas that you're like, well, that's interesting. Maybe if I go in that direction, like things are going to come out of the woodwork that are essentially here to, break us free out of some pattern in a sense. So I find that could be very fruitful maybe as we get our ducks in a row and allow us to break out of certain patterns that might put us in a really good place. But of course, there's many different things that may happen in that regard. But Shawna, what do you think about this opposition to Uranus and how it might play in with the Saturn energy?
Yeah, so I think it's really cool because I like the way that it happens in succession, where it's like, first, we have the Saturn where we're really working on our own authority and how it is that we take responsibility for things. And then Uranus happens later and is like, oh, maybe I can do, like, Uranus is like, maybe we can do things differently. And so it is like you're saying, Mel, like, how can we embody our sense of authority and power in a different way? How can we maybe even work within the structure of our lives in a different way? How can we relate to the people that we look up to, whether that's like mentors or people who are in like a boss or kind of like leadership role? How do we portray that leadership role to others? And it feels as though we're kind of like maybe grappling with things that have happened and what to do going forward, so that we can like reinvent ourselves in a certain way around our sense of authority.
I like that. Yeah, because let's keep in mind we have a strong Saturn, I think in this whole thing. So despite what comes in with the Uranian action, I think we really are going to want to cement things and get things in place, and really, get real around our situation and what it is we're working for. And hopefully that Uranus, contact is going to bring, like you said, new ways of looking at things, new ways to approach our own authority, or how it is we are portraying ourselves in the world, and how we build our own reputation and how people see us, in regards to that. And so it's very interesting because, okay, so we haven't divulged this information yet, but we have the sun who's going to be opposing Uranus the same day as we have that new moon in Libra, right, Shawna? So this is big. This is a big element to take in consideration here. We're going to talk about it more once we get to the whole new moon segment later on in the episode. But there really is a freshness that is tied in with this aspect, this Uranus aspect, because this is going to be the third pass of this opposition, basically. So we had Jupiter in Libra oppose Uranus, which was big. We all made changes in our lives. This is a turning point on where we're going, and we could just feel the world basically shift. Then we had Mercury take in that same position, right? Before moving into Scorpio. And now we have the sun, third time's a charm, right, Shawna? Maybe something is going to come around, especially with this new moon, that is really going to help us, solidify where it is we're going, and to think outside of the box, around, what's in place and really break free from a lot of, what may have been holding us back, from these changes that we are experiencing or trying to experience. So Shawna, what do you think about just all those aspects kind of coming together and like replaying this position in the zodiac, really driving the point home?
Yeah, it is like driving the point home. And I think that it's so interesting that this happens. It's to the degree that it happens on the new moon, this opposition with Uranus. And so, it makes me wonder if whatever this reinvention is or new way of doing things, if it is more of like a quiet revolution where it's like more something that we feel internally, because the new moon is not particularly extroverted. It's not particularly like it's not something that we typically see out in the world. It's usually like a quiet change that continues to unfold. And so so that's my sense, is even though Uranus is very bold, and when we see Sun Uranus in general, that combination, especially this opposition, it can have a tendency to be bold, and where there's like a grandness, or like something that's like, oh my gosh, I never would have expected this, something that takes us by surprise. I wonder if that's going to be softened a little bit by the fact that it's a new moon.
Yeah, it's quite possible. And regardless of what comes in at this time, right, Shawna, we have basically the ability to direct the energy because it is a new moon. It's the quiet time.
Yes.
And we can kind of mold whatever energy is happening, to our best ability for the best outcome. But we will talk about that once we get to the new moon, right? We'll leave that for that segment. And so, before we get into the tarot cards, let's, just talk real quick about, the Sun, Uranus cycle, just to give people some, dates to kind of think about as far as, how this story may be playing out. So we had our Sun, Uranus conjunction back on April 13th of this year at 24 degrees Aries. So that's when the cycle of growth and freedom has been starting. And then we had the square, to Uranus on July 20th at 28 degrees Cancer and Aries. So if you look back to mid-April and mid-July, you might find some pieces to this puzzle and where that opposition may kind of lie. So I'm pretty sure we kind of started conceptualizing this whole podcast around mid-April.
Oh yeah, we did.
Because we didn't start it right away. We waited because there was a lot of retrogrades during that time. But
yeah,
I feel like we kind of, feel like we kicked off our Uranian conjunction with these kind of ideas. And
around that time too, I'm remembering was when Venus was in retrograde too, and it was in the ballpark, I think. So anyways, yeah.
Yeah, it was close in Pisces, I think, right? Like Pisces. Yeah. So and I mean, I've said it how many times before, and I'm gonna say it one more time again. This year's been crazy. So I feel like this is a turning point in a sense, for some of the things that we have basically encountered, this year. So that being said, let's talk about these tarot cards, because I think they add another interesting layer into, these transits. And I drew the 7 of Pentacles as the focus and the Mother or Queen of Swords as the grounding. And I feel like this is an assessment. This is really much an assessment combination. We're really looking at what it is, we're focused on where we currently are, but we're also looking at what we have built up for ourselves. And that's definitely that Sun sextile Saturn, and especially since it's in the last part of the phase, we're getting that wisdom aspect. So we're like taking some time out to see all that we've built, and get a clear picture on that, get a clear picture on our goal, and picture that success and really believe in it. because that Queen of Swords, we might have had a hard time down this road. I might have had to deal with a lot of challenges, but we're where we are now, and we're at a stopping point of contemplation, basically. So, Shawna, how do you see these two cards playing together, and how that looks for our, everything that we're basically building right now?
Yeah. So I do feel like this is a sense of judgment, of discernment, of figuring out how it is that we want to focus our energy now that we've come to this certain point. It feels almost as if we're getting ready to step over a threshold in the future. But right now we need to kind of be like, okay, well, how am I going to be strategic about my work and be strategic about my time, especially with Saturn. Saturn is like, okay, you only have so much time and emotional energy. And so I think especially the Mother of Swords speaks to wise discernment of our energy.
Yeah, right. Because she sees that strategy. She knows how to work. She knows how to work through things, and that's her strength. That's her ability to really tap into logic rather than emotion. She keeps emotion out of things. And sometimes when we have the Seven of Pentacles up on, for perusal, we see that we might not be so satisfied with what we have built up, or perhaps we're at a stopping point and we're doubting, what it is we've done. And so that's where we have to be, a little careful in this combination, just because, the Queen misuse can be a little critical. And especially with all that Uranus energy in the air, there could be uncertainty, right now around our own goals and the progress we've made. And that's why we're contemplating things. So just remember that we want to stay the course. Don't let your, any criticism get you down, especially if you don't kind of see, you got to think logically here. You can't look at your progress emotionally. You have to look at it with a clear, like Shawna was saying, a discerning eye, so that you can really get clear on that goal and push through. Yeah. So I think that's kind of how these two cards are playing together.
Yeah. So. Definitely a time for valuing the intellect just as much as the intuition.
Yes, absolutely. Intellect is really going to help us get sharp on what it is that we're doing. So that being said, some questions to take away for these sun transits. I would ask myself, where do I need to take a good look at my efforts? How can I focus on steady accomplishment and stay the course? I would ask myself, with all this electric energy in the air, how can I use it to break free from elements holding me back and move on into a brighter future? And then lastly, I would ask, now that I've assessed what I've built and have fresh insight into my future, where can I make effort to go forth? How can I slay all day? That's what we're trying to do, Shawna, right? We're just trying to do the best we can and just kick as much ass as we can.
All day long.
All day long, because that's all we can do. So we do have it in our power to do that. So, we do have that. We're ending that moon cycle and we're wrapping things up, but we're ready to start again with a force. So speaking of force and a very deep place that we're going to be, sliding into, let's talk about the Mercury, that Mercury, Mercury going into Scorpio, and then conjuncting Jupiter, because this essentially is it's like getting our toe wet into Scorpio energy and the rest of the planets are going to eventually follow here. So we have Mercury, and this is what we are titling expanding your perspective. So we have Mercury who's entering Scorpio on Tuesday, October 17th at 12:59 a.m. Pacific time. which is 7:59 a.m. Universal Time and 5:59 p.m. Aussie Eastern Time. And that's at 0 degrees Scorpio. And so the Mercury is going to conjunct Jupiter shortly after on Wednesday, the 18th at 1:55 a.m. Pacific Time, which is 8:55 a.m. Universal Time and 6:55 p.m. Aussie Eastern Time. And that conjunction is going to happen at 1 degree Scorpio, right when it squeaks in. So Shawna, give us your next quote from Lucy H. Pierce.
Yeah, so this is from Burning Woman. For some, she came in a dream. For others, in words as clear as a bell. It is time, I am here. She may come in a whisper so loud she can deafen you, or a shout so quiet you strain to hear her. She may appear in the waves or the face of the moon, in a red goddess or a crow. And so I thought this was really beautiful for Mercury moving into Scorpio, because Mercury is all about our conscious awareness. It's about our perception. It's our mind. It's basically the thoughts that we have that come in that we're aware of. And so, Scorpio, it reminds me of how she's describing like things coming in through a dream or, like a whisper or a shout, or there's kind of like this mystical quality that happens when Mercury is in Scorpio. And then, it contacting Jupiter, it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like this transit is really about awakening a new sense of intuitive awareness. But yes, something that we can like actually connect with because it's Mercury. And so it is more logical.
Yes. It's like we're going to be filtering in, this new awareness, because essentially that's the function of Mercury. You know, it brings things into our minds for thought. It gives us things to mull over and to have our logic reasoning kind of toss ideas around. Yet when we get into the land of Scorpio, logic is not necessarily quite the function of Mercury at that point. It still has that, but it's definitely more based on intuition, feelings, and emotion when Mercury is in Scorpio. And Shawna, I think I think that this conjunction, especially with Jupiter, is going to be a weird blessing in disguise. Like I feel, especially with we're leaning up to a new moon. We just got serious about our lives with that Saturn sextile, and I feel like this Mercury action is really going to allow us to plunge into the depths of our own psyche and do so in a big way. Like certain things might come up, especially around the big picture and where we're going and what it is that we want for ourselves and see for ourselves and what we consider a fortunate route for us to head. I think we're going to get a little dose of intuition around that and where we should kind of put our energy and our personal power. And if those things aren't coming up, then perhaps we are getting a clue into certain elements of our psyche that need to be dealt with before we can make a lot of these changes that we're making in life. So in order to grow, we have to kind of basically get through some things that might be holding us back, especially emotionally, and how the mind is tied into those patterns. Especially at 1 degree Scorpio, we're just entering this energy, and so it's going to be fresh and very strong, but not well worked with yet. So Shawna, how do you see? I mean, there's lots of different things to approach that, but how do you see just the move of Mercury into Scorpio, and then immediately that conjunction, and how that's going to be like night and day with our thinking process in a sense.
Yeah, it does feel like a very dramatic shift. And I think this is ultimately, it's a time for us to trust ourselves, to trust the gut feelings that we get, especially if there is a situation or a question or a decision that needs to be made that comes up, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I think it's so important to not dismiss those little weird feelings that we have, or something that we feel like we want to look into a little bit more, whether that is a feeling about something being off, or I feel like it may be more the case where there's something that we want to like investigate. There's something that like, because it's Jupiter and because Jupiter wants things to be expanded upon, it's like, where are we being guided? And how can we follow that? And I think that it's like, I keep getting this image of like, little breadcrumbs being left for us. And I think that we need to follow those.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. I love the imagery, because a lot of times those breadcrumbs lead into the dark forest, right?
Yes.
And so, or lead us out of the dark forest. We leave them on the way in so that we can get out. And that is whether or not you were meaning to do so, Shawna. That is like the epitome of Scorpio. Is like really being able to dive into those depths, but also knowing how and when, and having the wisdom to come out of them. Because that's the thing with Scorpio is it dives so deep that sometimes we can get stuck in those realms, and we have emotions that due to our vulnerability to our emotions, we aren't able to pull ourselves out of those, like that mucky, muddy realm, in a sense. So if you feel like you're in that position,
are you there?
And you're like, oh, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Oh, yep. Okay. You cut out.
There we go. No, see, you never know with podcasts. It's always you just never know.
It's always a surprise.
Always a surprise. If you do find yourself in that situation and you need to kind of pull yourself back out of the depths, I think that imagery that Shawna placed with the idea of breadcrumbs, just follow the breadcrumbs through the light and come back out. Because it's good to examine yourself and get psychologically deep. But you don't want to pick yourself apart either. In that realm, because Scorpio energy can be brutal when it comes to the self-analysis part. It sees things. It sees things everywhere. And sometimes those things are overwhelming, especially emotionally. So how can we dive these depths of our mind, yet come up, rebirthed and replenished, by what it is that we have gone under, in a sense, so that we can grow, so we can take that Jupiter energy, and move forward in life. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think along with all of this, cause it is such a tricky balance. Like you're saying, Mel, it is important that we do go into that dark forest. Like that is something that Scorpio asks us to do. But at the same time, yeah, how do we got to get out of there at some point. And, I think that, especially because we're at this point, we're in the dark of the moon. The moon is in Libra, but it's before the new moon. So there's no conjunction just yet. And so that is a more internally focused kind of energy. It's where we're really, reflecting and, connecting with what is most true for ourselves. And so, I think during these days, like especially again, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's good to give some more time and space to process things so that we're like really going on our gut and we're able to follow those breadcrumbs, but we're like doing it in a way that honors our boundaries, that honors what we need, and that is helpful versus just being like some kind of fixation that happens.
Yes, because that's true. Scorpio can get very fixated on things. So just be aware of that. If you've become overly fixated or obsessing over certain things, it's good to analyze that. But it's also good to step away from it too, to some certain degree. But also when we're kind of obsessed with something, if it's a good obsession, then that means that we're passionate about it. And so if you find yourself, if you find your mind like elated in a sense and very passionate about something, or like Shawna was saying earlier, wanting to investigate something and go forth, in an area, yes, definitely do so, because, what you might find or where that passion is leading, could be very rewarding and lead you to some type of rebirth, in a sense. And like Shawna was saying, you know, we are at the dark of the moon, right now. So everything is calling us to basically take a moment and go within, and process these intuitive faculties, so that we can get really clear about our own inner mission, in a sense. And then we can put all that energy into the new moon when the time is right to start making those decisions and taking action on stuff. So I think that's where we can get the most benefit, out of the conjunction with Jupiter. Now, keep in mind, Mercury is going to be moving through Scorpio for the next 3 weeks. So, we got time in this realm, but, the fact that it hits that Jupiter conjunction first thing, is kind of what we're addressing here. So, but that being said, let's talk about these tarot cards. They put a whole nother, as always, they put a whole nother element, onto these transits. And so I got the 10 of Pentacles as the focus and the 4 of Pentacles as the grounding. And I just want to say, you know, cause here we have Pentacles, 2 earth cards, and we're talking about water here. I do want to make note that, the ruler of Scorpio, at least the traditional ruler, is Mars. And Mars is still currently in Virgo. So there is an element of, what we're processing, to be played out, still where in the land of Virgo. So I think this really plays into, actually the support, that we get from others, and being able to accept support from others. So we may find ourselves in a need, where we're a little vulnerable, and we might have to accept generosity from other people, or we might have to be more generous ourselves, especially since we have Jupiter involved, because Jupiter tends to be generous, right? It's like, or it can be. It depends on how it's placed. That's the thing. If you got trines in your chart and it's like trining Venus and the moon, you know, you're probably a pretty generous person. But if it's squaring Saturn and, you know, like, chances are you're like, I'm not giving you any. So I feel like this could be an issue that's coming up, right now as far as the give and take, element of Scorpio, and how others really help support us in our goals and what we build in life, if we let them. So that's just one element. Shawna, how do you see these 2 cards playing together?
Yeah, these cards speak about resources, I think. And then to like you're saying, Mel, to play off of that, Scorpio is about how it is that we blend our resources. It's about how it is that we make something that's even greater than just the sum of you and I. When you and I come together and we do something, like very much like this podcast, it's so much better than what we could do individually added together. Like there's some kind of alchemical process that happens. And these cards are speaking of that actually happening, so that there's something in the material world that can hopefully come of this. And I think that it encourages us to be practical, to be real, and to lean on others in a way that embraces generosity, so that we can have more abundance in our lives.
Yeah, because you're right, Shawna. You know, you can't, and this is a lesson I have definitely learned over time, is that you can't, you can do it all by yourself. You might be able to. Some people are. But for the most part, when you bring other people into the picture, and they support you and vice versa, you're just in a better place, and you're creating something that is that much more powerful, based on that alchemical process of the 2 energies. And so I think that is a very wise assessment of these 2 cards, and really a positive one at that. Because, you know, that 10 of Pentacles is really asking, it's a fulfillment in a sense on the material plane. And we get that fulfillment by what we've built personally, but all the support that is also around us. And with that support and that kind of end game picture and in that end result, there's a certain maturity and wisdom that is accounted with this card. So I also find it like it could also work out this way. Because the Four of Pentacles it can be known as being a little possessive or a little greedy or kind of being stuck because it holds on to something, that it holds on to things that, yeah, might be good, but if it were to release certain things, it's going to bring in something better in life. And so I think playing on this scorpionic energy and the fact that the ruler of Scorpio is still in Virgo, which is very discerning and able to kind of weed things out of our lives, that are not necessary anymore. I think this card combination might actually play into, us really having the maturity and wisdom, to know what it is that we really need or we really want to possess at this time. Because, Scorpio has to do with, resources, like we were saying, or especially shared resources. And so sometimes if we pare down our lives or like get really real about what is important to us, what it is we actually need versus the things that we want, and kind of let that go, like give away that kind of Four of Pentacles energy so that we're not stuck anymore. That can be very cleansing and refreshing, especially at this last, couple days before we have our new moon. So this could be a purging aspect, whether it's physical purging, getting rid of stuff, most likely maybe on a physical, realm, because that really kind of cleans up all the other realms. You're Virgo rising, Shawna. You know what a clean house does to you.
Oh my God. You have no idea. I love that, Mel. As you're speaking, that book pops into my head, The Magic of Tidying Up by the KonMari. And it's like, at least for me, when I purge and I get rid of things, which I do pretty often, I'm like, wow, I didn't realize how good it feels to let go of some stuff. It does bring a sense of lightness where it's like, instead of like hunkering down, and it actually takes more psychological energy to hold on to things that we think we need to define us than to actually let it go and to just let things flow a little bit more. Exactly.
And I know I can do a good deal of that myself. There's plenty of things I can get rid of. That's the kind of the irony of being a Cancer. Yeah, Shawna, so basically you're Virgo rising, but you're a Cancer. So we have the messy Cancer energy, but then we have that Virgo energy that's like, I gotta clean this up. There's gotta be. So do you find yourself, do you swing from, parallels, or or does the Virgo win over more? Who wins? Who wins in this situation?
Who wins? I think the Virgo wins over for the most part, because my place, like my home environment, is always pretty minimal, like super duper duper minimal. And I at least once a month I'll go through and purge and throw away or, donate things that I don't need. But the Cancer part comes out in that I have to have like all of my creature comforts. I like to have my coffee in bed, and I like to have like all of my sentimental things close to me. But then the Virgo in me makes sure that those sentimental things are minimal, kept to a minimum, I think.
I need to adapt your process here, because I'm swimming in stuff. I love stuff. Yeah. Give me all this stuff. Oh, but you can't have all the stuff. So sometimes you have to get rid of some things.
I see some purging in your future this week, Mel.
and that purging has been on my to-do list since I was born, pretty much. I'm like, I'll clean that closet, or I'll do this, or I'm going to tidy this area. And, doesn't always happen, but, I really want to get on that while we still have, Mars in Virgo. The clock is ticking. I'm running out of time to use this Virgo energy. But all that being said, we're a little off course here, but it's fun to talk, astro. So, all right. So back to Mercury in Scorpio, and its conjunction with Jupiter. Some takeaway questions. So I would ask myself, with Mercury now in Scorpio, how can I use the next 3 weeks to plunge into the depths of my psyche? What does that self-analysis have to say? I would ask, while my mind is focused on the big picture, how can I expand my perspective to see all possibilities? Which of those speak to me the most? How do I feel about them? And then lastly, I would ask, where can I open up to more support from others? Do I need to embrace vulnerability to accept another's generosity? Or perhaps be more generous myself? And so that is what I would ask myself. I got chills on the last one of my office.
Me too. I like that last one. Super important.
Oh, it is important. It is important, especially since we're in the land of Scorpio now, especially with Jupiter for the next year, how we share our resources with other people and merge our efforts. It's definitely going to come into focus. So let's do that in the most positive and abundant way possible. Okay, so let's move on to our last but certainly not least transit, and that's that new moon in Libra. And that is going to happen. Well, first, before I tell you when that's going to happen, let me tell you what we're titling this, and that is New Social Cycles. And so that is going to be exact on Thursday, October 19th at 12:12 p.m. Pacific time, which is 7:12 p.m. Universal time, and Friday the 20th at 5:12 a.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that's going to happen at 26 degrees Libra. So Shawna, kick us in with your last quote.
So this is also from Burning Woman. Once we start to work with feminine power, we begin to see that it is not our minds that are in control of this power. It ebbs and flows with the movements of the planets, the precession of the seasons, the moons and tides, our own internal cycles of menstruality, anniversaries, and the events around us. All these and more impact our experience and expressions of power. We learn to become aware of these various patterns and their impact on us and work more consciously with rather than against or in spite of them. We learn that they are all part of the same process. We open toward the energy rather than shut down to it. We learn to trust the flow. And so I love this for the point of the new moon, because it feels as though like there's all of this that's been culminating. There's all of this that's been drawn in, kind of like the way that a wave will pull in and away from the shore, and then everything is gathered up. It's all of this potential that's ready to be manifested through the whole entire next cycle. And so I think that because this new moon is also aspecting Uranus, like we briefly mentioned, it does have this certain element of like learning how to trust that as well, learning how to trust the unknown that's happening with this new moon.
Yes, I think that is very wise advice, because it's so interesting, because it is the unknown, and to some extent it's the known. But we have to take action. You know what I mean? Like, because we were saying earlier in the episode is that this is the third time we are coming to this point, essentially, and talking to Uranus in opposition from Aries, from Libra. And so there's definitely some uncertainty in the air, and some things might come about during this new moon time, that really put things into perspective, or offer us new opportunities or ways of doing things a little differently, or really setting that change, changes we've been making into motion, and really, starting a whole new cycle, with our awareness on board with, where it is we are, changing and growing in life. Because, you know, with that Jupiter opposition to Uranus that happened. How far are we away from that now, Shawna? We're like 3 weeks now.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of in
weeks.
retrospect. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So, a lot has happened during that time. And especially on an internal level, I feel, things happen on the outside of us, but we're all changing on the inside based upon those outside awarenesses that are coming in, especially dealing with other people in certain ways. So I feel like this new moon is going to be a really fresh burst of energy, around making progress, with these new considerations in mind and our turning point in a sense.
Mhm.
So Shawna, we basically have that, the Jupiter Uranus opposition. We have the Mercury, opposition that just happened, to that same point. So we basically, Jupiter's big. It's been happening like the whole year, basically. So this isn't something we can pinpoint. But that recent opposition with Mercury had us thinking about the changes that we're making, having us understand where we're breaking free and breaking new ground in our lives, and where our own personalities have been, morphed into this, new being in a sense, especially with Aries. And then now we have Mercury, who's now conjunct Jupiter, essentially, really letting us dive deep into the changes we're making. So all that energy in place, Shawna, what do you think about all that? Like, I don't even have a specific question other than what is your insight of how all this basically is setting up a story to play out, for a new, fresh beginning?
Yeah. So as you're speaking, Mel, it's really clicking for me that everything that we've talked about that's happening this week, it is more about going inside. It's about internalizing and processing things like from the sun and Saturn and the menopausal cycle point that it's at. And then Jupiter and Scorpio, diving deep with the mind. And then this new moon is also, going inside. And so all of this, it is like a new beginning that starts in the very, very center of us. Like it starts on the inside and there's this like sense of freedom maybe, or this new spark, that something that we're excited about. And that comes from the inside, and we get to do something about that as the weeks and months, play out. And, it feels really sweet, and it feels like an enlivening kind of energy. It feels like there's a buzz, a sense of excitement that like nothing even maybe happens on the outside, but we're just like feeling really good.
Yeah, we're psyched on the inside.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, we have to keep in mind too that this is a cardinal new moon. Once again, we're enforcing new beginnings. We're enforcing fresh bursts of energy, and new cycles. And especially since our new moons, ever since the solar eclipse, have basically kind of been pushed to the end of signs. So we almost we get to work through all the energy, like we work through all the energy of Libra, up until almost the very end, as we have our new moon on this very sensitive point. And it's interesting because it's at 26 degrees, Libra. So in Witeki's system, I basically open to receive, and my feelings are open to receive, and basically I decide upon those two things. So what is coming to me as being offered, and how I feel about that is essentially allowing me to make decisions in my life and take, and then go forward and take action once we move on to the next degree. So I find it, cause that seems to be a big theme with all this Libra energy, and especially with that Jupiter opposition to Uranus from these points. Is a lot of us have had to make certain decisions in our lives, or weigh these different options, back and forth. We might have sat a long time in indecision before fully, like we kind of partially made a decision, but we were weighing other things back and forth. And so now whatever we've been weighing is pretty much cemented, and we can now go forward, through a solid decision, which is going to bring change in our lives.
Yeah, I like that. It's like all of that, negotiating and processing and like thinking about things, there's been a sense of closure, a sense of completion around what it is that we've been thinking about and processing, maybe even over the past 3 weeks or so.
Yeah. And one, because it's in Libra too, chances are we've been dealing with other people. Somehow some other people have gotten involved in the things that we are thinking about or in our dramas and, and so I really feel like this could be a new beginning around, just, how we are with other people and how we communicate in a fair way. Because Libra is all about reconciliation and having harmony and balance in our lives. And staying calm in when we're faced with, crisis in a sense, that opposite side, that Aries energy. And having, basically having a strategy in a sense to stay as calm as possible and as balanced as possible. And so I feel like there's just, that new moon energy is allowing us to really bring equilibrium into our lives and how we deal with other people, and our social efforts and all that. So even though we've been working on it for the past, 20 something days, I feel like this is the fresh start around, that energy.
Yeah, I like that. And it makes me think of too, like we've been, learning how to balance and find equilibrium. And now with Uranus, it's like, life is like, all right, let's see how you do when you get a little curveball, when you get a little surprise of Uranus kind of energy too, like, and not in a bad way, but like when things are unpredictable, but we're prepared for that because we've been learning how to find that balance and how to work with others in a harmonious way.
Yeah, because this isn't our first rodeo. Once again, this third time around, we've had a planet, basically touch this sensitive point. And the whole idea of the new moon is, like we were saying earlier, when you get to go in, and assess what it is that is worthy of your undertaking, and what it is you want to focus on and manifest, and what we call, light casting, so you're probably going to want to spend this day, on, Thursday, or Friday if you're over on, on the other side of the planet, in Australia or anywhere, in Asia, either one of these days, I think it's still going to be fine. But go within, get in touch with yourself. We have that scorpionic energy with Mercury and Jupiter there. Like this, I feel like this is such a powerful light casting moment, because of all that, kind of, self-analysis and psychological depth that can be had, based on the Mercury and Jupiter placement. And so let's go in and decide what we want to, manifest, and get that plan in place. Because these are very potent moments of energy. And if you're not consciously directing them, you might manifest something you might not necessarily want. So let's focus on how we could best use this time to get really clear about our intentions, to bring more balance in our lives, and to really grow, within ourselves, our decision-making processes, and our partnerships. So.
Yeah, I think that's wise advice, Mel. I remember reading somewhere, I'm not sure where it came from, but that Jupiter is like always be careful what you ask for because you might get it. And so I think that the fact that this is also on we have the Jupiter, Mercury energy and then a new moon, which is about setting new intentions and things. It's like, yeah, this is a good time to be very intentional. Whether or not you have a typical practice, it might be nice to do a little reflection and to write down some things that you want to focus your time on. Yeah,
because I feel like it's going to be very fruitful if you do so.
Yeah.
So get in there. Help, use that free will. Start manifesting those intentions. Yeah, get that really clear about what you want to see and how you want to rebirth your life in a way, because that sun is going to be moving into Scorpio here on Sunday, like I was saying, Sunday or Monday, depending on where you are. And that energy is definitely going to shift, into the realm that we were talking about earlier, when we were talking about Mercury and Jupiter. So that being said, let's talk about these tarot cards, because I think, as always, they add another dimension. And so for our new moon tarot, we've got the Fool as the focus and the Father or King of Swords as the grounding. And really, I couldn't have asked for two better cards, I think, for a new moon in Libra. And I really think it has everything to do with new beginnings around what is truly fair. And being able to communicate that to others. Cause keep in mind, we're still in Libra here. And others are very much, part of this process. And being able to, become that master of communication, especially with others, is so valuable. And just communicating what needs to be said might really start us off, on a fresh journey with a new beginning. Either with someone else or letting that issue go. And that's just one facet, but Shawna, how do you see these two cards playing in?
Yeah. So to me, the Fool is like, there's so many, this is a new beginning, and there's kind of like a lot of different possibilities. There's a lot of different potentials that could happen. And I think, it speaks to this being a fertile time for, like you were saying, Mel, to really harness what it is that you want. And then the Father of Swords is like, yeah, like you need to be more specific about, or not, like that you have to, but like you benefit from being more specific about where it is that you want to go. Cause the Fool is like, hey, like, leap, go forward, do, there's like this sense of innocence and unknowing that comes with the Fool. And so, that can be to our benefit. And at the same time, I feel like the Father of Sword is saying, okay, how do we use the compass with wherever it is that we're going? So we don't have to be, judgmental about where something is, but we want to direct ourselves in a subtle way.
Yes, that makes complete sense, because, what the Father is essentially saying to me, is he's able to make well-informed decisions. Like he can weigh all the options like we're talking about and be able to look at it logically and not emotionally, and really weigh what's on the table, and to as basically take a leap of faith, but do so with already having made some good decisions, like not a blind leap of faith, not a, I would definitely avoid being overly ideal, in any type of way, because can be the Fool's shortcomings, as well as being very idealistic in a situation. And I don't think that the Father of Swords is idealistic at all. The Father of Swords is like, I've weighed every single angle of this, like, like a Libra would, you've seen every single angle. And now you can take action, and basically take that leap of faith and trust in, taking that leap of faith. Because you're not doing so from a blind spot. You're doing so from having fully weighed this over in your mind. And now it's really the only logical thing left to do is to take action and step forward, and really trust the path that we're on. So yeah, how can you begin anew by removing yourself emotionally, from a situation and like basically releasing yourself from the past? Because I feel like that's a lot of the, that Uranus energy, that Jupiter, then that Mercury, and now the Sun. We're trying to move away from something into this fresh future. And so how can we do that, but in a smart, logical way? Well, that being said, some questions to take away for this new moon tarot, or not new moon tarot. We just did that for the new moon in general. So, I would ask myself, with this fresh new moon energy, what do you want to light cast during this period? What speaks most to solidifying balance and harmony? I would ask, do certain relationships in my life need a new start? How can I lean on the side of logic rather than emotion to become the master of communication. And then lastly, I would ask, with the element of the unpredictable in the air, where could I benefit from trusting in the flow? Can I embrace the gift of spontaneity? Because the Fool has no problem with being a little spontaneous. And since this episode is all about the flow, how can we go with the flow? You know, how can we go with that flow? So that being said, you know, Shawna, what have we learned?
So much.
So much. So we've learned that the sun is going to sextile Saturn, and then oppose Uranus earlier on in the week. And we just have to learn to slay all day and take care of business and really assess where it is we're going and how we're going to get there. We've learned that Mercury is moving into Scorpio and is going to conjunct Jupiter almost immediately. And so we're going to be diving those depths and we're going to be plunging in, to our psyche, and what we are motivated by and what we are passionate about. And then lastly, we learned that the new moon in Libra is going to bring a whole new cycle of relationship and, social function and making decisions in our lives. And we can start fresh and new, and step out there like the Fool does, but in a calculated and logical way. So Shawna, I know you have a fabulous action item to share with our listeners, so please do.
I do. So this is our action item. So this Thursday, I want you to set aside some time. I want you to set aside 20 to 30 minutes to just sit down and do some writing. And it can be free form. It can be more specific. I'll leave that up to you. I think everyone's very different on what works for them, but, it feels really important, especially with this new moon, that we have a little bit of free space to think and to get what it is that's bubbling up for us intuitively and intellectually, to get that down on paper. And you can make this really formal and fancy and like set intentions, but you don't need to do that. Like for me, this action item is just about acknowledging what it is that you're thinking about. So if you just want to, free associate, or if you just want to do like a brain dump for like 20 minutes or so, write about all the things that you're thinking about, even that's effective. I really want us to work with this new moon. That's why I'm saying Thursday. And then also the Jupiter and Mercury energy, like that is about like writing down the things that are coming up for us. So that's your action item Thursday. At any point, 20, 30 minutes, just sit down and do some writing with yourself.
Shawna, I think that's an excellent action item, because one of the most potent things you can do during a new moon cycle is write down those things and like get them in this reality, this picture, and help manifest them by, making them physical themselves by being on that piece of paper. So I think that's great. Great action item.
So, and then of course, other ways to, get involved are to, comment or tag us on Instagram or Facebook to let us know, how you're doing this. And even, we always love hearing from you guys on how you listen to the podcast. Another way to get involved is to become a patron of the podcast to show your appreciation. And of course, to get those really cool show notes that we have for you. Again, you can find out more information about that on feminineprinciplepodcast.podbean.com.
Yes, because we'd love to get those over to you, and we find them very useful. That is for sure. So if you want to find us throughout the week, you can find me over on, at energeticprinciples.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube at Energetic Principles. So Shawna, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube under Neo Feminine Astrology. And then also a little side note, for this week, if anyone is in San Diego, I'm hosting a new moon meditation circle. And so you can find out more about that, on my social media on Instagram and Facebook.
Yes. What a perfect way to start the new moon, with the action item and then the circle you can't go wrong. And if you want to find our centralized presence, we are on Instagram and Facebook at Feminine Principle Podcast. So if you're doing any of these action items or working with the show notes or doing your own new moon rituals, we'd love for you to reach out and share with us, what you're doing and how you're working with this energy, because part of what we do and what makes it so rewarding is seeing how everybody responds to it, and takes their own, action. So please share if you have anything like that, going on. So yeah, Shawna, any last words for our listeners this week?
Just sending lots of love and asking that if you do enjoy this podcast, definitely leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, and subscribe to get future episodes the moment that they're uploaded.
Yes. And do share with a friend, because that's the best way you can share, with us, is sharing with others. So yes, we do very much appreciate it. So, like always, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. And until next time, may the stars be with you.
Namaste.